Girls again? Another girl? You are a girl's factory. Or perhaps you don't even know how to position yourself properly so your husband can deposit a male child inside your womb. If my mother didn't give birth to a male child, how would you even see my brother to marry? Female producer, that is what you are. Just producing girls like a factory machine.
The cry of the newborn had barely faded when the storm erupted. The room was still heavy with the smell of warm water, herbs, and the quiet exhaustion of childbirth. Muna lay weak on the bed, sweat clinging to her forehead, her trembling arms gently cradling the tiny baby resting against her chest. For a moment, there was silence. Then Mama Chima's voice shattered the air like thunder. "Girls again," she exploded, her eyes blazing with fury as she stared at the baby in disbelief. She threw her hands into the air and paced the room angrily. "Another girl." Her voice grew louder, so loud that neighbors outside slowed their steps, some even stopping by the fence as whispers began to spread through the compound. Mama Chima pointed a shaking finger toward the weak woman on the bed. "You are a girl's factory," she shouted bitterly. Muna's fingers tightened slightly around the baby, but she said nothing. Tears slowly filled her eyes, yet she kept her head lowered in silence. But Mama Chima was not done. Her anger had only begun to boil. She leaned forward and spoke words that made even the women outside gasp in shock. "Or perhaps you don't even know how to position yourself properly so your husband can deposit a male child inside your womb." The room fell painfully quiet after those cruel words. Muna's lips trembled, tears sliding quietly down her cheeks, but she remained silent. At that moment, Chima's sister, Adiz, who had been standing near the doorway watching everything like entertainment, suddenly burst into loud laughter. She folded her arms and shook her head slowly. She said mockingly, looking straight at Muna with a wide grin. "If my mother didn't give birth to a male child," she paused for effect and chuckled again, "how would you even see my brother to marry?" Some of the women outside shifted uncomfortably, but Adiz continued without shame. She clapped her hands once and laughed loudly. "Female producer. That is what you are. Just producing girls like a factory machine." The cruel laughter hung heavily in the air. Muna lowered her head quietly, staring at the innocent baby sleeping peacefully in her arms as her tears fell silently onto the child's blanket. She swallowed the pain sitting deep inside her chest and said nothing. Now, before we continue this painful and emotional story, if you are new here, please take a moment to subscribe and support this channel so we can keep bringing you powerful African stories like this. Sit comfortably and allow me to carry you carefully through this story. But first, I want to ask you something. If you had just given birth and your mother-in-law said those cruel words to you, what would you do? Would you remain silent like Muna, or would you respond differently? Tell me honestly in the comments. If you were in Muna's position, what would you have done differently? And what lesson do you think this moment teaches us about family, patience, and cruelty? Also tell me this, after watching this story, would you ever become a wicked mother-in-law to another woman someday? I want to hear your thoughts as we continue this powerful story. The story begins with the name of a woman whose presence alone could silence an entire compound. Mama Chima. Even before she appeared, people would whisper, "Mama Chima is coming," and suddenly the noise would fade. Mama Chima, whose real name was Nkechi, was not an ordinary woman. She was the kind of woman people spoke about in low voices when she passed by. Children who had been playing noisily with sticks and old tires would suddenly scatter or pretend to be busy with something else. Neighbors lowered their voices the moment they saw her tall figure approaching. Even grown men avoided unnecessary arguments with her, because once Mama Chima opened her mouth, her words could slice through the air like a whip. The younger generation would later describe her with one simple title: an iron lady. Her eyes were always sharp, always watchful, as if she could see every small mistake before it even happened. Nothing escaped her attention. A crooked wrapper. A lazy child. a disrespectful greeting. Everything had to be corrected immediately. Mama Chima believed strongly in discipline, order, and control. According to her, the world worked best when everyone stayed in their proper place. Children must obey without questioning. Women must endure hardship without complaint. And men must respect their mothers no matter how old they become. That is how a proper family survives, she would say proudly, folding her arms with authority. Yet the most surprising thing about Mama Chima was her husband, Papa Chima, whose real name was Okachukwu. He was the complete opposite of his wife. Where Mama Chima was fire, Okachukwu was calm water. Where her voice thundered, his voice was soft and gentle. He was a peaceful man who rarely raised his voice. People often laughed quietly about their marriage. One neighbor once joked, shaking his head in amazement, "Only heaven knows how this quiet man married a thunderstorm like Mama Chima." But Papa Chima never argued with his wife. Never. When Mama Chima spoke loudly in the compound, he simply nodded slowly and adjusted his cap as if everything she said was perfectly reasonable. Sometimes he would even say softly, "Nkechi, you are right," just to keep the peace. Because in that house, everyone knew the simple truth. Mama Chima was the government. Mama Chima had only 2 children whom she raised with the same iron discipline she used on the rest of the household. Her first child was Chima, a quiet and respectful boy who resembled his father in both patience and kindness. Her second child was Adiz, whom everyone simply called Ada. From the moment they could walk, Mama Chima trained them strictly. No laziness. No disrespect. No foolishness. If Chima forgot to greet properly, her voice would ring across the compound. "Chima, is that how you greet your elders?" If Ada left her chores unfinished, Mama Chima would stand over her with hands on her waist. "Adiz, in this house we do not raise lazy children." Sometimes Ada would laugh about it with her friends later. One day she jokingly said, if Mama Chima was a soldier, even generals would salute her. But despite her strictness and her hard voice, Mama Chima loved her children deeply. Everything she did, she believed she was doing for their good. However, hidden deep inside her heart was one powerful belief that she held onto with stubborn pride. A belief that would later bring great pain into her family. Mama Chima believed something very strongly. She believed that no family was truly complete without a male child. A son carries the name, she would say firmly whenever the topic came up. Without a son, a family's legacy disappears. At that time, she did not know that this belief would one day test her heart in ways she never imagined. Chima grew into a responsible young man, the kind of man elders pointed at with quiet approval whenever his name was mentioned. Like his father, he was calm and gentle. He spoke with respect, listened more than he talked, and carried himself with a quiet dignity that made people trust him easily. Many people in the compound would often say, "That boy Chima, he truly resembles his father." But while Chima inherited his father's calm spirit, he also carried the strong discipline his mother had drilled into him since childhood. He woke early, worked hard, and treated everyone around him with kindness. Then one ordinary day, something happened that would quietly change the course of his life. He met her. Her name was Muna, though her full name was Minochi. From the moment people met Muna, 3 things always stood out about her. Her beauty, her humility, and her good upbringing. Her parents, Eziani and Ngozi, had raised her with deep dignity and respect. Muna spoke softly, never raising her voice even when others did. She greeted elders properly, bending slightly with both hands together as a sign of respect. Even when she laughed, it was gentle and modest. The first day Chima saw her, she was standing quietly beside her mother, helping arrange some items. The afternoon sun fell softly across her face as she adjusted the wrapper around her waist. For a brief moment, Chima simply stood there watching her. Something inside his heart suddenly became still, as if everything had fallen into place. He did not need anyone to convince him. He did not need time to think about it. Deep inside his mind, he said quietly to himself, "This is my wife." Unlike some young men who rushed into things carelessly, Chima approached the matter with respect and patience. He first found the courage to speak to Muna politely. "Good afternoon," he said gently one day when he met her outside her family compound. Muna greeted him respectfully. "Good afternoon." Their conversations were simple at first, filled with shy smiles and polite words, but Chima's intention was clear from the beginning. Soon he approached her parents the proper way. He spoke to Eziani with respect and explained his intentions honorably. Everything was done according to tradition. No rushing. No drama. No secret meetings or scandal. Just love, patience, and respect guiding every step. When the time finally came for both families to meet, Mama Chima was eager to see the woman her son had chosen. The moment Muna entered the compound and greeted respectfully, Mama Chima stood quietly with her arms folded, studying the young woman from head to toe. Her sharp eyes carefully examined everything. The way Muna tied her wrapper. The way she lowered her eyes respectfully. The way she spoke softly to the elders. The silence stretched for a moment as everyone waited for Mama Chima to speak. Then she cleared her throat and said slowly, "At least this one looks responsible." The room relaxed instantly. Those who knew Mama Chima understood that this was actually a strong compliment coming from her. The marriage ceremony that followed was filled with joy. Music filled the air as drums echoed through the celebration. Plates of food passed from hand to hand. Laughter spread across the gathering as relatives reunited and danced happily. Chima and Muna sat side by side, surrounded by blessings from elders and cheerful teasing from friends. It was a day of happiness, the kind that families remember for many years. But even as the celebration continued and people sang joyfully into the evening, Papa Chima quietly pulled his son aside for a private conversation. There was something important he needed to tell him. One quiet evening, after the celebration had settled and the compound was slowly returning to its usual rhythm, Papa Chima called his son aside. They stepped under the shade of the tall Iroko tree where the wind moved gently through the leaves. "My son," Papa Chima said softly, his voice calm like always, "build a small house for your family. Even if it is small. Start your home separately." Chima blinked, surprised by his father's words. "But Papa, why?" he asked quietly, unsure of what his father meant. Papa Chima sighed deeply and glanced toward the main house where Mama Chima was already shouting instructions at someone, her voice sharp and commanding. Then he leaned closer and whispered, almost in a tone meant for Chima's ears only, "To protect your wife." Chima nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in his father's advice. But Mama Chima, ever watchful, had overheard part of the conversation. She spun around, her face a storm cloud, her hands trembling with authority. "What nonsense," she snapped. "My son will live in my house. I must watch over his family." Her voice rang across the compound, leaving no room for argument. That was the end of the discussion. At first, life continued peacefully. Mama Chima supervised everything in the household. She watched how Muna cooked, how she washed clothes, how she swept the compound. Every movement was scrutinized. Sometimes, when Mama Chima caught what she considered a small mistake, she would shout sharply, "Muna, is this how your mother taught you to cut vegetables?" Muna's hands would pause mid-motion, but she never raised her voice. She remained calm, her posture humble, her eyes lowered respectfully. Chima watched her quietly, admiration shining in his eyes. He loved her patience, the way she endured his mother's strictness without complaint. It was a quiet strength, a strength he knew would hold their family together no matter what storms came their way. Soon, the news spread through the compound that Muna was pregnant, and a quiet excitement filled the air. The whole house waited eagerly, the women whispering softly about the future, the children peeking from corners with curious eyes, and even Papa Chima moved about with a gentle anticipation. But it was Mama Chima who carried the weight of expectation the most. Every morning, before the sun rose fully, she would kneel on the cool floor of the veranda, hands raised, voice echoing through the still air, "God give us a strong male child. Let this one be a son to carry our name." Days turned into months, and the anticipation grew heavy like the humid air of early rain. Then, finally, the day arrived. The cries of a newborn filled the house, soft yet insistent. Chima and Muna rushed to the bedside, their hearts swelling with love, and there, in Muna's arms, lay a beautiful baby girl. She was perfect, delicate, her skin soft and warm. They named her Somtichuku, a name that spoke of hope and faith. Chima smiled broadly, a joy so full it seemed to warm the entire room. But Mama Chima's smile was weak, fragile, almost non-existent. She said nothing, only shook her head slowly, the disappointment barely concealed in the tight set of her lips. 2 years passed, and Muna became pregnant once again. Mama Chima's heart lifted with renewed hope. She moved quietly through the house, whispering to herself, this one will be our son." She even bought small boy clothes secretly, folding them carefully into a chest, her fingers trembling with expectation. But fate, it seemed, had its own plan. When the day of delivery came, another girl arrived, delicate and soft like her sister. They named her Chinelo. Mama Chima's eyes narrowed as she looked at the tiny bundle in Muna's arms. This time, she did not even try to hide her disappointment. She said coldly, her voice flat and sharp, carrying a weight that seemed heavier than the baby's tiny cry. The room fell silent, the joy of the newborn overshadowed by the stern gaze of the woman who ruled their lives. When Mona became pregnant again, the entire house waited with tension, the air thick with whispered prayers and anxious eyes. Every movement seemed heavier, every step quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mama Chima prayed harder than ever, her voice rising loudly each morning, "God, let this one be a son. Let this one carry our name." But fate had its own plan. The cries of the newborn filled the room one hot afternoon, and when Muna opened her eyes, she saw another beautiful baby girl, delicate and soft, sleeping in her arms. They named her Amarachi. And that was when the storm began. Mama Chima's face twisted with fury, her eyes flashing like lightning. She exploded. "Girls again," she screamed, her voice echoing across the compound, rattling the walls and startling the children who peeked through the doors. She leaned closer, pointing an accusing finger at Muna, her voice sharp like a knife. "You are a girl's factory." Neighbors outside the fence froze, whispering nervously, some even pressing their faces closer to listen. Mama Chima's anger was not yet sated. She lowered her voice, but the words were even more cutting. "Do you not know how to position yourself properly so your husband can deposit a male child?" The words hung in the air like a cruel shadow. Muna stood silently, her small hands trembling slightly as they rested on her baby's tiny body. Tears filled her eyes, warm and quiet, rolling slowly down her cheeks. But she said nothing. She did not fight back. She did not argue. She simply held her daughter close and let the storm rage around her, her heart aching but her spirit still unbroken. Chima's sister Adiz was even worse, her laughter cutting through the tense air of the compound like a knife. She stood near the doorway, hands on her hips, shaking her head as if she could not believe the situation herself. Then she laughed loudly, a sound sharp and mocking, and said, "If my mother didn't give birth to a male child," she paused, her eyes glinting with mischief as she looked directly at Muna. "How would you even see my brother to marry?" She clapped her hands once, then added cruelly, "Female producer." The words echoed across the compound, and Muna lowered her head quietly, clutching her baby close, her heart heavy but her lips pressed tight in silence. Chima stepped forward, his face tight with frustration, and tried to intervene. "Mama, please stop," he pleaded gently, his voice firm but respectful. "Ada, please respect my wife," he added, his eyes darting between his mother and sister. But Mama Chima refused to listen, her face a mask of anger and disappointment. Her voice rose sharp and cold, slicing through Chima's attempts at reason. You should marry another woman. One that can give you a son. Chima's jaw tightened, his hand clenching into a fist, and he said firmly, without hesitation, I will not. I will not marry another woman. Muna is my wife, and she will remain my wife. The compound fell silent for a moment, tension thick in the air, the defiance in Chima's voice standing like a wall between his mother's fury and his young family's fragile peace. One quiet evening, long after the noise of the day had settled, Papa Chima called his son aside. His face was serious, the usual gentle calm replaced with a shadow of worry that made Chima's chest tighten. They stood together under the dim light of the veranda, the wind stirring softly through the trees. Papa Chima's voice was low, almost a whisper, but each word carried weight. My son, do you remember my advice? He asked, his eyes searching Chima's for understanding. Chima nodded slowly, a sad heaviness settling over him, the weight of his mother's anger pressing on his heart. Papa Chima took a deep breath and looked off toward the house where Mama Chima's voice still echoed in his memory. Then he turned back to his son, his voice gentle but firm. This is what I was trying to avoid. The words hung in the air, heavy and quiet, leaving Chima to stare down at the ground, understanding fully the meaning behind his father's caution and the storm that had come to pass. Finally, after many sleepless nights and long moments of quiet thought, Chima made a decision. He would no longer allow the constant anger and cruel words to shadow his young family. He built a small house far away from his mother's compound, simple and humble, nothing luxurious, but it was filled with the promise of peace. When the walls were finished and the roof secured, he took Muna by the hand and gathered his daughters, leading them gently to their new home. The air felt lighter here, the wind softer, and for the first time in years, Chima felt hope. But when Mama Chima heard of his decision, fury flared within her like a sudden storm. What? My son, you cannot, she shouted, her voice carrying across the distance. You belong in my house. You will not leave me. Chima stood firm, his eyes steady, his voice calm but resolute. Mama, it is time. Muna and my daughters need a home of their own. I will not let anyone harm them again. Mama Chima trembled with anger, her hands clenching tightly, but it was too late. Chima had already taken the first steps toward protecting his family, and nothing she could say would undo it. Not long after, Eddie got married to Obina, a young man from a respectable family, and at first, her marriage was peaceful. The house was filled with laughter and gentle chatter, and Ada felt a happiness she had never fully known before. She moved gracefully through her new home, arranging her space with care, and even found joy in the small routines of married life. When she visited Chima and Muna, she would sometimes tease Muna lightly, a playful smile on her face. Muna, my dear, she would say, laughing softly, at least you have learned how to survive Mama Chima's sharp tongue better than I did. Muna would smile faintly, keeping her patience, her eyes gentle, and Ada would nod approvingly, feeling clever and light-hearted. But life has a strange way of teaching lessons. Ada did not yet know that the winds of challenge were quietly gathering on the horizon, ready to sweep through her happiness and test her in ways she could never have imagined. Ada's joy of marriage slowly began to fade as life tested her in ways she never expected. She gave birth to her first child, a beautiful baby girl, and for a fleeting moment, happiness filled her heart. But soon another girl arrived, delicate and sweet, and then another, each birth carrying the weight of expectation she could not escape. Her mother-in-law, Mama Obina, known to everyone as Ifinanya, grew cruel with every passing day. She moved through the house like a shadow of judgment, her eyes sharp, her words sharper. You are useless, she would shout, her voice echoing in the small rooms. Only girls again. Each insult struck Ada like a heavy stone. Her husband, Obina, did nothing to protect her. Instead, he supported his mother without hesitation, his voice firm and unwavering. I need a son to carry my name," he said, as if Ada herself had filled the world. Each night, Ada lay awake in her small room, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, her body shaking with quiet sobs. She clutched her daughters close, whispering small prayers for strength, her heart breaking quietly as the cruelty of those she trusted most pressed heavily upon her. When Mama Chima heard how her daughter was suffering, a fierce anger rose within her, hotter than any she had felt before. Without a moment's hesitation, she stormed through the narrow path to Ada's house, her feet pounding the earth with purpose, her eyes blazing with fury. She reached the door and pushed it open, her voice sharp as lightning. "Ifunanya, how dare you treat my daughter this way? Have you no shame?" Mama Obinna, standing in the center of the compound with her arms crossed, laughed coldly and pointed a finger at her. "Leave my house," she snapped, her voice cutting like a blade. "Go and control your own family." Mama Chima's anger flared higher, but before she could speak again, Mama Obinna shoved her roughly toward the door. The push sent Mama Chima stumbling backward, the dust rising around her feet as she landed outside the gate, her chest heaving with disbelief and rage. She stood there for a long moment, the shouting still echoing in her ears, realizing that even her power, even her fury, had limits in the face of another woman's stubbornness. Mama Chima returned home slowly, each step heavy, her head bowed, the usual fire in her eyes dimmed by a weight she had never known before. For the first time in her life, she felt shame, a deep, burning shame that settled in her chest like cold iron. She remembered Muna, standing quietly with her head lowered, tears slipping down her cheeks as she endured insult after insult. She remembered the words she had shouted, the mockery, the cruel laughter that had filled the compound. The memory of Muna's silent suffering cut through her like a knife, sharper than any anger she had ever felt. And now her own daughter was going through the same pain, weeping in the night, crushed under the weight of words and expectations, her innocence battered by cruelty. Mama Chima's lips trembled, and for the first time, she wished she could take back every harsh word, every cruel command, every moment of her relentless judgment. The pride that had guided her all these years now seemed hollow, leaving only a raw, aching regret that pressed against her heart with every slow step toward the house. The next morning, Mama Chima rose before the sun, her heart heavy but determined. She walked the narrow path to Chima's house, each step measured, each breath trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. When Muna opened the door, the sight before everyone froze them in place. Mama Chima, the Iron Lady, knelt on the ground, her hands pressed together, her eyes glistening with tears. "Yes," someone whispered, "the Iron Lady knelt." Her voice shook as she spoke, raw and humble. "Forgive me." Muna's eyes widened, speechless, her hands covering her mouth in quiet astonishment. The house was silent, the only sound the soft rustle of Mama Chima's wrapper as she bowed low. Slowly, Muna's lips curved into a gentle smile, and she said softly, "I forgive you." Relief washed over Mama Chima, but her heart still ached with the weight of her past actions. Yet there were boundaries. Mama Chima was not allowed to sleep in their home. Forgiveness had been granted, yes, but it did not erase the memory of the pain, nor did it undo the lessons learned. Soon, the quiet joy in Chima's home grew even brighter, for Mona became pregnant once again. This time, everyone waited with bated breath, hearts heavy with hope and fear. And when the day finally came, something truly surprising happened. Muna gave birth to twin boys, two tiny miracles wrapped in soft cloth, their cries filling the room with life and promise. Chima, overwhelmed with happiness, almost fainted, his knees buckling as tears of joy filled his eyes. "Muna, we are blessed, we are truly blessed," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. Even Mama Chima, who had once judged so harshly, could not hold back her tears. She wept freely, her face wet with joy, her hands trembling as she touched the boys gently. Praise God for these sons," she sobbed, the sound of her relief and happiness filling the home, washing away years of pain and expectation. Soon after, joy came to Ada's home as well. She gave birth to a baby boy, a son to carry her husband's name, and the house seemed to breathe a new life. The moment the baby's cry filled the room, the air shifted. Her husband's family, who had once been harsh and unforgiving, softened instantly. Mama Obina's stern eyes glistened with unspoken relief, her words gentler than before. "Praise God," she murmured, a small smile breaking through her usual scowl. Peace returned to Ada's marriage, flowing quietly through the rooms, settling over the children, and resting finally on Ada's tired but happy heart. She held her son close, tears streaming softly, and whispered, "Thank you, God, thank you." The house, once heavy with judgment and sorrow, now hummed with laughter, warmth, and the promise of love renewed. Mama Chima changed forever, though it did not happen overnight. At first, it was subtle, a softening in the way she spoke, a gentleness in the way she moved through the compound. Where once her footsteps had struck like thunder across the dusty ground, now they barely disturbed the earth. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, now carried warmth and patience. The neighbors noticed, children stopped hiding when she approached, and the women who had once trembled at her orders now smiled as she passed. She became kinder in ways that surprised even her own family. She no longer measured her words for cruelty or sharpness. Instead, she listened first, asking questions before issuing commands, her eyes seeking understanding rather than judgment. "Mona," she would say quietly as she watched her daughter-in-law fold clothes or prepare meals, "this is very good, but let me show you a little trick that makes it easier." There was no pride in her voice, no need to assert authority, only care. And her heart grew especially soft for her grandchildren. She loved them deeply, the daughters she had once dismissed, the girls she had once called a girl's factory, now the center of her world. She would watch them play in the yard, their laughter filling the air like music, and for the first time she understood fully what it meant to love without condition. She held their small hands in hers, braided their hair gently, whispered prayers over them in the evenings, and sang lullabies she had never sung before. Even her stern eyes, still sharp when necessary, now shone with warmth. When she looked at her granddaughters, she often whispered to herself, "My little blessings, my precious ones. God has given me these children as gifts." She no longer obsessed over the gender of her grandchildren. She had learned a truth that cut deeper than any fear or expectation she had once held: children are blessings, whether boy or girl. She would smile softly at Muna as she held the babies, her voice tender. "Chima, we are so blessed, every child is a gift from God, every life a miracle." Chima would nod, feeling a quiet relief in the way his mother now looked at his children, not with judgment, not with expectation, but with love. Mama Chima began to teach others this truth too, speaking to her neighbors, her friends, even young mothers in the compound who feared she might judge them. "Do not measure love by the gender of your children," she would say gently. "Each child carries a promise, a blessing. Each is a light in this world." And slowly, the house that had once echoed with fear and sharp words became a home of laughter, of gentle guidance, and of quiet respect. Mama Chima, once the Iron Lady, had become a grandmother full of love, a mother full of understanding, a woman who finally saw the beauty in every child she had once overlooked. Her transformation was complete, not in a single day, not with a sudden change, but through reflection, remorse, and the deep lessons that only life could teach. And as she held each granddaughter close, whispering their names softly, tears of gratitude would fill her eyes. "My little ones," she would murmur, "I see you now. I love you, just as you are." In that love, the past harshness melted away, leaving only a heart full of warmth, a home full of peace, and a woman forever changed. Humbled and grateful for the truth she had finally embraced, children are blessings, whether boy or girl, and in that simple truth lay the greatest joy of all. The family reunited often, the compound alive with movement and joy each time they gathered. Children ran through the yard, their laughter echoing against the walls, chasing one another in games that seemed endless, their small feet pounding the earth in rhythm with their delight. The air was filled with shouts of play and squeals of happiness, the once heavy silence now replaced by the pure music of life. Mama Chima, the woman who had once ruled with an iron fist, now spent her days in gentle calm, sitting beneath the shade of the veranda with her grandchildren gathered around her. She told them stories of the past, of heroes and clever children, of lessons learned and wisdom gained. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, now flowed like honey, soft and warm, wrapping the children in comfort and wonder. And that, my little ones, she would say, is why we must always be kind, even when the world seems harsh. The children listened, wide-eyed and eager, asking questions, laughing at her animated gestures, and pressing close to feel the love in her presence. Chima watched Mona smile as she held their daughters, her own daughters' laughter mingling with their cousins, the peace in the home settling like sunlight after a storm. Finally, the family lived in peace. The anger, the shouting, the cruelty of the past had been replaced by love, understanding, and forgiveness. And in that home, filled with voices of children and the soft, warm presence of a grandmother who had learned the deepest truths of life, they all lived happily ever after. The family reunited often, each gathering a celebration of love, a testament to patience, forgiveness, and the blessings of children, whether boy or girl, filling the air with laughter that would never be forgotten.